If you liked this episode of the Hockey IQ podcast, please leave a like, a comment, and especially review our podcast. If you truly listened all the way to the end and you're listening to this right now, you enjoyed this episode. Please go and give it a 5-star review. That helps us out more than you know. Thank you so much and look forward to the next one. On the Hockey IQ podcast today, and I'm probably going to totally butcher this, so help me out here. Kabir Bubna.
Perfect, nailed it. Most people call me Cabs, so feel free to give me the nickname from now.
Tabs makes it super easy. I can see how that sticks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you on here. Just some background for the listeners here. You're currently studying to get your PhD in skill acquisition, and done a lot of different kind of coaching over the last decade or so. So I'm curious though, what does a PhD in skill acquisition look like?
Um, that's a really good question. For me, it's really fun. One of the benefits or one of the kind of attracting points of a PhD for me is just the ability to engage with knowledge in a very creative way. It's not so much just studying textbooks and classes, even though reading is a big part of my job description, how I spend my time, but it's also looking at how different areas of science, different areas of thinking, even different concepts can link together. And as PhD students, our task is to be at that edge of science, and the edge of research. And I get to sit down and stare at a big whiteboard, so to speak, and connect some of the dots that people haven't had the time to connect, or people are wanting to see connections between, in the whole coaching sphere. And we know that can be a very complex space. And skill acquisition, and maybe people will disagree here, but for me personally, I believe skill acquisition ties together a lot of sports science. For someone to effectively apply skill acquisition, that science of how people develop, they need to have a decent understanding of psychology. If you're working in traditional sports or more athletic sports, you need to have a good understanding of the body and physical training. You then also need to understand how to coach. So how do you support people? How do you create those environments? How do you have those interactions, those relationships that garner growth, success? And skill acquisition for me personally just becomes everything you need to know as a coach in the most applied way possible. And now I get to study it, contribute to it to hopefully help coaches in the future find more joy, find more effectiveness in their contacts and their roles.
So, as you've been going through this program, what have been maybe some like eye openers for you, or maybe some connections that you didn't see going together, but now it's like, oh yeah, this is just so obvious to me.
Um, I think one of the most obvious things, and I guess maybe more as an academic, is a lot of the research that's out there. It's great, but they sometimes lack the connection to the real world. Um, I'm obviously now, how long have I been at university? I've been there, I've been in university settings for almost 10 years. So when I get the big 30-page, 40-page academic papers, it's still challenging for me to get through and consume, but I understand more often or not the big words, the complex terminology. But now when you hand that over to a coach who maybe doesn't have five, six, even maybe even undergrad in sports sciences, trying to get them to understand that paper. And as a PhD student, you kind of flip the lens because you now are also teaching within the institution a lot of the times. You get to practice breaking down a lot of these big academic terms, and then you get to see, oh, well, through that breaking down of academic terms, you get to draw the links between the disciplines. So we talk a lot about in skill acquisition, challenge and support. So how challenging our practice might be, and how much support, feedback, guidance I as a coach might give my players. When we learn to simplify that terminology and those concepts, we get to see the link between challenge and support as a skill acquisition, applied skill acquisition concept, its roots in its connected roots in sports psychology. So stress, arousal, attention, motivation, that then links into self-determination theory. So you really get to show that a lot of our actions aren't in isolation. And when you get to uncover those links, it, for me personally, has how would you call it, shown a create a great shift in my coaching because I know every action I take has multiple consequences and it's not linear. That if I tell a player to do something, it's not always going to happen. And also in the same breath, if I give my players an option, they might not always use it correctly. So I now have a better understanding through this privilege and through these opportunities to have a better roadmap of all the variables that might affect a player, a team's development, a team's competitive success.
So I've got a few areas I want to go into, but let's start maybe with like some foundational stuff.
Mhm.
For those that are not understanding the concept that well, what is self-determination theory?
Yeah. So self-determination theory is it's a greater motivational theory, and it breaks down motivation into three essential pillars. It says for someone to have intrinsic motivation, which again, if we want to break down all the terminologies, intrinsic motivation is when we want to show up for ourselves. There's no reward, there's no pressure, no one's giving us anything. If we were to do it for free, if it was to be free, no one's paying us, we'd still do it. That's intrinsic motivation. We like to see that as the highest source or the highest quality source of motivation. We also understand that in the realities of life, you're not always going to be relying on that, but we want to understand how to get the most of it possible. And to do that, we can we can offer three pillars. The first is autonomy, which is having choice. We have two different physical behavioral responses when we're told to do something or when we're given options between multiple things and then asked where we want to put our efforts. How much attention, engagement, all of those things when it comes to practice, when it comes to, you have to do your 5K run today. But if you're told you have to run 5K every day versus, hey, you ran 5K yesterday, do you still feel up to running 5K today? Or do you want to do like a chill 3K? Sometimes they might pick the chill 3K, sometimes they might pick that 5K, but when they have that choice, they're gonna at least give their 100% rather than not completing it or skipping it. The second is then competence. We want to feel like we have a shot at completing the tasks. I'm not a very strong runner, so if someone told me tomorrow, go run a 5K, I'm not going to feel very confident. I'm not competent. I don't know if I can do it. It's been a while for me. So it's like, okay, I'm not that motivated to this. You're going to have to, give me a really good extrinsic reward. You're going to appeal to me extrinsically. If you told me run a 5K and I'll take you shopping, or you can get like a nice new pair of shoes, sure, I'll run that 5K. But if you told me just run a 5K, you're going to get nothing. Probably not going to be too motivated. And you can link that to, various activities. You'll have players in your environment that love playing the game. Ultimately, a lot of us come to sports trading or engage in sports to play that full game. Now, they want to just rush and get onto the game, but sometimes we have to do those developmental activities, the other stuff, which is not the full game. So how do we give them some choice or like scale those activities to their competence? Like, okay, well, you might not be amazing at this in the full game. So if we practice this now, if we take that 10, 15 minutes, we'll give you more game time if you nail this activity. You're giving them a little bit more choice. You're matching their competencies, you're matching what their skill sets have to offer them. And the last and the most important thing in my eyes is sport is inherently social, whether it is you and your friends, the coach and one athlete, and or the coach and a team. So we also need to have a sense of relatedness. Do we feel like we're all working together? Do I feel valued in this environment? Do I feel like the people around me are not just my teammates or my coworkers, but they're also people who are my friends? When I make a mistake or when I'm having bad performances, I can lean on them and they will maybe not always come first, but they will come and help me, pick me back up, help me find my form again in whatever capacity that looks like. And we need varying levels of all three things to, really get people showing up and wanting to show up as their best every day in practice, every time they come, regardless if They're winning, they're losing, they're getting all game time. They haven't gotten a lot of game time. They're coming back from injury. All of these three pillars affect people. And as a coach, being sensitive to what preference people have and also what preferences the whole group has, can have a lot of difference in how much progress you really end up making throughout a season.
All right. Beautiful foundation. Now, let's take that from kind of we'll call it the science world and move it into the applied world. You've coached a lot of different sports, whether it be squash, soccer, basketball, and a heavy focus now on esports. Like when you're going into these environments to actually
Mm.
coach, what are some of the first things that you're implementing to set yourself and your players up for success as you're trying to develop the individual and the group?
I think for me personally, as the coach I am, I try and emphasize that relationship. I need to know kind of what makes my players tick, and then from there, it helps me understand what makes this group tick. Um, Esports is a fun context to look at, because for most of us, we will be coaching some traditional sport where everyone meets up once, twice, three times a week at a physical facility. We all train together, we train with each other, we compete against each other, even though we're on the same team. So we build a sense of camaraderie. Esports is a bit funny, and it really stretches and challenges you as a coach because, like how we're conducting this podcast over a Zoom call, esports teams will meet online, and many of them won't even turn their camera on. There's so many teams that I've coached where I haven't even seen the faces of my players. All I know is a voice. How do you create a shared sense of belonging in that environment where you're virtual, you're not meeting them face to face, you don't have body language to rely on, but then also when practice ends, you just hang up and then that's it. You're away from that environment. So even looking at that, it's coming to, okay, well, first things first, if you're competing regularly, you probably have very passionate players. So how do you leverage that passion? How do you get them to share experiences, share knowledge through that competitive passion? One of the hardest things to get an athlete to do, is to get them to rest. We know a lot of these guys will leave practice and get extra reps in at home, or they'll go to the park and get a couple extra games in pickup games. If we're looking at basketball, whether they'll kick a ball between their friends as soccer players. So I really like starting if I'm coming in first week of the season, my first week is going to be quite social. It's not going to be focused on those game skills necessarily because I want my team to understand each other. I want them to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, how they respond to challenge, how they respond to stress. And I want them to understand if we can support each other, if we can cover the gaps when they exist, we're going to be a stronger team and we're going to give ourselves the best chance of success. What that looks like is first names. Names are super, super, super important. Again, in traditional sports, not a big deal. In esports, people typically don't learn each other's names because you're not with each other for a long period of time. You're not meeting them in person. It doesn't feel as personable. So for in an esports team, we want to be talking to each other by names instead of like the game handle. I guess in traditional sports is it's even as simple as fist bumps, high fives after plays, whether they're good or bad. Like if you watch a game of volleyball, regardless if they win the point or not, everyone gives each other a high five. Doesn't matter. And studies have gone to show that teams that do this and teams that have more physical contact between one another show greater levels of resilience, show greater levels of cohesion. After reading that study, I went and did that with a social team that I play with. Whether if someone kicked the ball out, whether they made a good pass, whether we scored, we just gave high fives. We had so much more fun. We put in a lot more effort. Even if we lost, we knew like we can win the next one. No one's going home frustrated. And again, context is social, but we can see that happening in professional sports too.
So we need to be high-fiving and fist bumping all the time. Gotcha. That's the secret to unlocking the social aspect of this.
For sure. I think it makes a big difference when you can look at your teammate and say, "Hey, You're gonna have my back, I'm gonna have your back. And I think a high five, a fist bump, even if, when you see a lot of soccer players do this, when a pass goes away, they put their hand up and acknowledge the vision. All of these small moments, they stack up, they build a lot of trust, a lot of confidence between your players. And then when you're a coach and you see your players get along, it makes your job a lot easier because you'll see them go over and give them advice or support them when they make a mistake. So then they're already coming into maybe a team talk in slightly better moods, which makes your job in turn a lot easier as a coach when they can help emotionally regulate each other. And then my role as the coach is just come in, help them find their bearings, their focus, and set the problem in front of them for them to then go and be like, yeah, okay, we have trust in our preparation, we have trust in our training, and we have trust in each other. Let's go out and smash this, regardless of what the score looks like.
I love that. It's the picking each other up, making each other better, and understanding like that sense of belonging that's so beneficial mentally to put the players in a space to perform, develop. Next question, I want to kind of just go back to the beginning of our conversation of like being on the edge of science and research. So your job is to be on the edge of science and research.
Mhm.
Where are we currently with the edge of science and research compared to maybe what people think is the current edge of science and research?
Um, so I think a lot of people are still focusing on like quantity and how to program training. Very important variables and by no means solved. Whether they can be solved or not is a conversation for a whole different day with probably people a lot smarter than me. But right now, a lot of research historically has looked at, how much time we should spend developing expertise, how often should we train, what types of training are generally more beneficial than not. We see a lot of discourse on social media on opposed training versus unopposed training, individual training versus team training, realistic environments, non-realistic environments. Those are highly debated, closer to the edge of science topics because they're really hard to sometimes empiricalize, generalize, because each human, each context, each learning environment can be so unique. Something that we have lacked, and something that I'm incorporating within my PhD, and I can imagine a lot of other PhD level postdoc and even senior academics are doing now, is now trying to look at longitudinal study designs. What that means is historically, research has been collected on one moment or like one event. So a researcher will observe 10 coaches coach one session and then try and find comparisons. But coaching is a lot more context driven than that. So there's been a push for research to follow one coach over a long period of time so you can understand various decisions over different times. Kind of like, like your Drive to Survive series or, your behind the scenes at Manchester City. We're trying to do that in a more of an academic way so we can truly understand the challenges, the pressures, the stressors coaches face. How do they navigate it? How do different coaches respond to different things? And once we have a handful of, you know, longitudinal studies that cover the core dynamics and core stressors of coachings, there's no saying why we can't run simulations and give coaches theoretical problems and research their responses and their hypothetical solutions to find how coaches think, how coaches understand, how coaches implement themselves. Because what we see in traditional sport or any sport, matter of fact, is wins and losses ultimately guarantee a coach's job. And many coaches know that. They're very aware of that, and that will change how they make decisions. A lot of coaches, you can argue, make decisions that aren't of the benefit of the team, but are at the benefit of winning and losing, in turn, them keeping their job, which makes sense. Completely fine. No coach wants to be out of a job, especially at that high level of performance where jobs are so rare. But when we sacrifice talent development, player well-being to keep a job, sometimes it feels like we're doing a disservice as a coach.
I'm curious. because there's we obviously all want to win, and we
Mm,
want to see our players have that experience of having success. No one wants to see people fail consistently. If you are, we've got other problems. But like the ultimate idea is we want to bring success, long-term success, sustainable success, beyond sport and into life.
mm.
I'm curious from looking and watching coaches through time, like what does an evolution of a coach look like? What does good coaching look like? How do they understand themselves and implement themselves? What does this actually look like in practice of maybe good versus bad, or just the evolution of a quality coach?
So let's start with, I guess, first principles. To frame what a good coach is, I think it's really, really, really difficult to say because we have seen such varying styles of coaching that have, you know, filled the resume column of achievement. They've also then had great referrals and reviews. Like, yeah, this coach, even though he was a bit mean, bit strict, was what I needed. Um, So I think good coaching ultimately comes down to the development of four buckets. You need to develop the athlete as a human, so you need to give them some life skills. You need to obviously develop them in the game. So you got your technical, your tactical skills. You then need to develop their psychological skills. And lastly, you develop their social skills. Um, a good coach is able to affect all four boxes to some degree across all players. Now, not every player will struggle with discipline. A good coach will be able to recognize which ones do. Now, discipline could be, a social skill. It could be a life skill. Punctuality, showing up to training on time, showing up to game days on time, showing up to game days prepared with the right equipment, with the right socks, with the right shoes, Knowing how to tie your shoelaces properly are also skills, to do. A good coach is able to cover those four boxes. Now, many coaches, and even for myself, when I started coaching, before I even had the opportunity to learn and engage with the science and different methods of teaching, coaching, um, many people believe the coach should speak a lot, should be giving a lot of information. And I understand why a lot of people get there because that's what their learning experiences are like. Many people who go into coaching, and what's probably universally true for a lot of people watching this is we went to school at some point, and school is the teacher stands up front, they say a lot of things, we try and make our notes, and then we do an exam. A lot of those people, that's how we understand learning to work. So it's no surprise that when we go to coach, we do the same. We get everyone together, we tell them everything they need to know, and then when they go do the practice, which is our version of the test, how well they do it informs us who's better and who's worse. In the realities and the complexities of how kind of development works and athletes and students, some players will pick things up pretty quickly, some players will pick things up slowly, and everything in between. And a good coach is able to understand who needs more attention, who needs a bit more guidance. And the best coaches, or at least in my evaluation of a coach, the best coaches find who who's doing well and how they can support the other people. Who can be a leader in this environment, in this task. And I think a leadership can be structured within the team, when you're giving your players captaincy responsibilities, but leadership on practice can be quite fluid, depending on someone's mood, depending on someone's response or psychological state. If someone's feeling really fired and passionate, just because they haven't been given the armband doesn't mean a coach can't leverage their leadership position in that moment. Coaches understand when they can give the players the steering wheel, and they also then understand when it's their time to drive the bus. Finding a good balance between that usually separate the good coaches from the best coaches, because you can still be a good coach even when you're driving the bus the whole time. There's no doubt about that. But usually the best coaches understand when it's okay to give the wheel away.
Yeah, I find that to be the hardest one, especially with like I do high school. Um, so they're coming to that leadership, and you want to give them that space, but also they still need a high level of support to understand, like mentally, potentially where to be and like how to go. And there's a lot of guidance, and I find frustration in both sides where you just tell them everything. And then also I find frustration in the idea of trying to just pose questions the entire time, but they don't have any background knowledge, information to pull from or life experience to pull from. So just finding that balance is often the largest challenge I see at my level with the high school kids, 14 to 18, of just figuring out when to truly drive that bus first, give it away, but also finding, I think the best finding opportunities and situations where you can give that steering wheel away to them as much as possible. Sometimes a little bit too much, where it's like, okay, I will step in. It's kind of like the driver's head with the other steering wheel on the other side of the car. Um, but also just finding that way of like leading and setting the framework up. I call it the commander's intent. Like you've got to have the commander's intent in your mind, which makes the decision making process a little bit easier, the leadership process a little bit easier, and understanding how to behave.
Yeah, yeah, like the commander's mindset, the commander's intent is super powerful. If I'm understanding you correctly, in how you use it, I think the finding the balance can be tricky. It really depends, in my experience, to how receptive and how willing your players are to occupy the mantle, to fill the shoes. If no one wants to be a leader, it feels kind of moot to give them the wheel. I'm like, nah, man, I'm happy. Just you can be the Uber driver. You just get me there. Some players really enjoy that. But a lot of players, after a few engagements, will passively show you signs that they want to do a bit more. And something I've implemented, at least in my time in esports, where it's a lot more virtual and a lot more of our learning happens through discussion with each other. We kind of say closed mouths don't get fed. And I like reiterating this as, look, there's one coach in an esports team, there's 5 players. In a basketball team, there's 15. In an ice hockey, there's maybe what, 15, 20 players on a squad.
Yeah,
You know,
21,
I
22.
I don't know what you guys are thinking. I don't know what you guys want. So you guys need to tell me. And when you tell me, I might not be able to cater for it right now, but now that you've told me, you've given me the choice to give it back to you. And it kind of goes both ways. So sometimes you need to be a leader just in telling me what you want. And then once I know your needs, I'll come to it. I'll get to it when we have the right time to address it. When it makes sense to address it, not just for you, but for other people as well. And then maybe in this time you've had more time to think about it. So I can say, hey, we've been working on this idea together. You can present why you think it's good to the team, get your buy-in, get your confidence, leave your mark, and then I can do my job of making sure we're learning or developing that concept in the way we need to, in the way that works for us, and giving you that opportunity to be like, hey, I think we should be playing more this style, or I think we need to work on this skill. I really encourage my players to do that and say, hey, come tell me. I'll figure out how to get you guys better. But if you say we need a better pass code, that's fine. Give me till next session. I'll
Yeah, I love that relationship, and the communication goes both ways, not just from coach to player, but also the opposite way, and the psychological safety you have to set up and have in place for that to develop. Also, so curious on too, like when we talk about the people development, like instead of thinking from top down, like how do players actually develop? I feel like that's a little bit of a misnomer with a lot of people. I know there's another podcaster out there, last name Gray. He wrote a book on like how do we learn to move. So it's kind of like a skill
mm,
acquisition from that aspect. Curious from your science PhD, actually practicing, how do players actually develop? And how did they develop maybe the fastest? Like we all want our players to develop faster than everyone else's, so we obviously improve
Mm.
and get better and have more success.
Well, I mean, time is like the number one factor. Like you need some level of time. You can't expect to do something once and have it learned. We normally don't call the guy who gets it right on the first go a genius. We normally call him lucky. We call geniuses, we call people geniuses when they find every way it doesn't work and like the few ways that works to a high level of consistency. Those people are the true geniuses. But the guy who gets it right on the first try is just lucky. And we all hate that guy. We all hate that guy no matter what we're doing when he gets it right on the first try. Um, so time is really important. So then the real question becomes how do you use your time in the most effective and the highest quality way possible? Now, rest. Rest is one of the biggest kind of facilitators of development in any sense. Physical development, whether we're trying to gain muscle in the gym, they will talk a lot about rest. Being able to rest effectively, getting quality rest will improve your effort the next day, but then also improve the repair and the refueling of the days of hard work. If we don't properly rest in whether that's physically, mentally, you know, and the balance between those, a lot of the hard work and the time we put in can just diminish. Outside of time and rest, what you do need is an appropriate level of challenge. So progressive overload in terms of gym terms. If I'm just benching 20 kg, just the bar for the rest of my life, my pecs aren't going to get any bigger. To get those popping Dwayne Rock Johnson pecs, I need to be able to lift more on the bar as time goes on. Similar in sport. If I want to become faster, I'm going to need to shorten my goal, or I need to be able to, if I want to be able to run a 5K, if I want to be able to run a marathon, I can't just train 1Ks. I have to slowly push the distance and then slowly do the real thing and rehearse. So you need to challenge yourself to a point of rehearsal where you can do the whole thing, and that's training. Um, Now within when you're challenging yourself, it's not just again higher intensity, but it's also variation. Can I do what I want to do many different ways with different ingredients, with different flavors? Because the best of the best will still get you the win, but they can do it every single way possible. And what we see is this inverted U is when you're a novice, you have high levels of variation in how you solve problems and a lot of errors. As you slowly, become like intermediate, and when you're an intermediate performer, what you have is one or two solutions, and you really, really only try to achieve the goal through those one or two solutions. So we see a decrease in errors, but only a few options of success. Now, what we see when you become an expert performer is they're able to adapt themselves to so many different conditions and still find success, even though their movements look so different from sequence to sequence. Right? Even if you take, I know I'm jumping through a lot of context, a lot of analogies here, so bear with me. But an F1 driver, there's a perfect line around the track, around the racetrack that you can take. The best drivers try and stay as close to it as possible, but between each lap, there will be minor differences that help them shave time, gain time, save tire while still being competitive. What they showcase is a high level of controlled variability that still allow them to be really good. So to learn the best, you need to challenge yourself, but you challenge yourself by trying doing it in different ways, in different settings, in different contexts, in different environments, so that when it comes to game day, where you don't know what's going to happen, you're the most prepared possible. You're not going to feel stressed out because you're like, oh yeah, I've been in this situation before. I've been 2-1 down before, so this isn't going to stress me out. Oh, I know what it's like to play a man down for the last 30 seconds of a quarter, and they're on the break. I know I can get back and defend it. I know I just need to slow them down and my team will recover. I've been through this. I've felt these emotions before in practice. And in reality, your practice should be a lot harder than your competition. Because if your practice isn't harder than your competition, then you're not going to be ready. You really need to leave it all out there because we spend also a lot more time in that practice environment than we do in competition.
Quite a few little nuggets in there to pull out. Practice being harder than competitions, something I feel like we don't do very often. In ice hockey, I call it inverted rushes, where usually you'll do odd man situations where the attackers have more. So it's 3-on-2. Sometimes you do like 2-on-2, but very rarely do you put only two attackers and then three defenders and say go attack and try to have success. Like, how do you challenge the top end of your roster versus the bottom end, and what's right for both? Because I want to kind of pull up on that U-shaped of skills of like the novices tend to have a ton of variability, and it's kind of like the I don't know what I don't know, and I'm exploring everything.
Mhm.
Then it's like, okay, we start to hone in on, okay, these might be some solutions that'll work. And then I'll call it the attunement phase at the very expert level, where we're so in tune with the environment. Now I'm picking up all of the nuances and figuring out and having further variability. Um, with that, I think a lot of people get stuck in the intermediate phase. Like they very rarely move on to the expert phase. And I think a lot of it has to do with success, whether it be psychological fear or just like coaching, like just simplify, do what works. And it's almost a discouragement of moving into the next phase of what they actually need for development. That's where my mind goes. I'm curious, am I down the right track or am I completely off the reservation?
No, no, that's perfect. I think the word discouragement there is almost perfect to talk because inherently we're all a bit afraid of failure, especially once we've tasted success. Once we know we can do something, especially a certain way, and we find a level of comfort with that, we are so resistant to change as humans. And when coaches, we as coaches typically are pretty time poor, regardless where you're at. Even if you're at, NHL, NFL, NBA, whatever, every coach is going to say at some point, I wish I had more time. Every coach has expressed that feeling. Um, so I understand the notion of, yeah, we found something that's worked. Let's just make sure this is like the best thing to do. Like we're the absolute best at this. But sport, at least for me, is the best vehicle for being like the jack of all trades. In your sport, you should have the ability to do all the required roles. Doesn't matter what position you play. And kind of like maybe not challenging top down or bottom up, but something I got introduced to a lot in my training sessions when I was playing sport is when I used to play soccer a little bit, I used to play up front and attack. And one day what they did was all the attackers would play defense and all the defenders would play attack for the whole training session. I'm never going to need to know how to perfectly slide tackle ever in my life. I never needed to do it ever again. But for that 1.5 hours, I had a newfound respect for defense. I understood how hard they worked. I understood every time I gave the ball away in this area, it meant I stressed them out and they had to work harder than they need to. I understood all of these things, and from there it then changed how I attuned myself to the environment when I went back into a forward. Because I knew, oh, if I lose the ball there, the opponent will have 1-2 passes and they'll have a very good opportunity to score. But if I lose the ball in this side of the pitch, it's going to be fine because it doesn't affect my defenders. So it changed a little bit how I made decisions just because I was just put in a different environment. I was asked to think a different way, you know? And
Or
and
even just like the
similarly,
the vision, like what is afforded in vision where you're like, oh yeah, that was really stupid, but I couldn't see
mm,
it when I was a forward because I didn't have as much of a field vision as I do as a defender that has much more of the field and information in front of me versus a forward who needs to maybe scan more.
mhm,
So just like that
exactly.
that attunement, yeah, I like that how that goes of like, 'cause I love putting players in different positions strategically not one where they're drowning, but whether it be in practice or
Mm,
games where you can experiment and play around. And it's like, okay, we've accomplished what we need to accomplish. We found the new respect. We've started to tune in on some things. Now we're ready to go back to maybe a position that is better for our skill set or our personality, whatever it may be, and how much that grows the players rather than telling them all of these things. Like, go into the deep end and experience it yourself.
yeah, I think experience is usually the best teacher because ultimately you can give them all the information, all the data, all the science, but until they go do the thing, they're not going to get better at the thing. Talking about the thing is not doing the thing. Thinking about the thing is not doing the thing. Ultimately, doing the thing is doing the thing. And we need to make sure when they go, whatever it is they do is of the highest quality, is of the highest usefulness to them or to the group.
Yeah, they actually have to truly feel it. The difference between knowledge and execution is a wide one.
Hmm.
Um, I was laughing actually last night. I was kind of upset with some of my players, our penalty kill. So I had them like all draw up what are we supposed to do? How does this work? Blah blah blah. And then I showed them the video of them doing the exact opposite, and you could see the realization of like,
Hmm.
okay, I should probably tune in a little bit more, you know, in practice and in games. And it's okay to think out there. It's not like you want to program yourself not to think. You just want to make
Yeah,
sure that we're putting our focus in the right areas. So, yeah,
100%.
how do we get our players to truly feel it, not just be able to regurgitate it back? And it sounds great. So, next area I want to go with this is kind of the meta game. How do we help coaches learn how to coach? So how do you coach coaches how to coach? So, I'm curious. You've had access to see a lot of coaching and a lot of coach is. How do we actually go about helping and mentoring? Um, so we'll start with that, and maybe we'll move into the idea of like, how do you help coach and mentor those that have been doing this a long time and maybe aren't as open as those that are early on, those novices that are open to a lot of ideas?
So I'm glad you mentioned that because coaching coaches is not an easy feat. We as coaches like to, we're proud people. And again, nothing wrong. We've worked hard to get to where we are. We like to think we do good in our work. And I know as a coach myself, I've put in a lot of hours that no one's seen, no one's thanked me for for results ultimately that don't matter, just because I was passionate. A lot of us are very passionate about our job. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned when working with other coaches, um, especially when I'm seen or perceived as more of an academic with the titles and my current context, it's not about telling them they're going wrong, but it's showing them all the places they're doing well and saying if you make one or two changes this thing that's giving you, for example, for the sake of numbers, 60% gain can give you 80% gain. You can make this is good, it's working for you. Let's make it better. And when you show them those one or two instances in their environment and you show them you're not here to just reshape the wheel and what coaching looks like, because again, there is no wrong coaching. There's right context to do everything as a coach. It's helping them understand, getting them to self-reflect, giving them that power, that process, so that they're looking for questions. They're as players need to be attuned to the problem, we need to be attuned to the players and the practice saying, I wanted them to learn this. What does that really look like? What does a good day of practice look like? And am I seeing this? Like, what behaviors do I need to see to know practice is going well? And then actively monitoring that in your practice as a coach, and then from there, getting them to that stage is really important. Now, once they have that, we can go, okay, how do you set your goals for the future? But the most important thing when it comes to coaching any coach is first showing them where they're going right. Because if you go, hey, you're doing this really well, I want to improve it by doing this, 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 you can knock off some of the things they're not doing well under the guise of, hey, I'm doing this to improve your good thing. And you've made them feel really good, made them feel really warm on the inside. and you mean it as well, right? You go, hey, this is really good. We want to keep this in the environment. I'm here to make this stronger. This is the element that keeps your environment together. Let's strengthen it.
It's also great for players too, building off of strength. And we all have our weaknesses, but how can we strengthen the strength? And to your point, like how can we either one, use it in our strengths in different areas, or two, how does like telling a player all the things not to do is one thing, but then telling a player what to do is another thing. And
Mm,
same thing with coaches of like, man, you're doing this really well. Here's other ways you can use it. Or here's
mm,
how, or pose the question of like, well, what if we did it like this? You do that same thing over here. Or
mm,
what if you did this little thing? So it's within the strength, but just slightly tweaked and the impact it has elsewhere. Like one of the common things I like to talk about is like, you're really good at challenging the players. How can you challenge the players to think? So it's less
mm,
so of like challenging with practice design, but also challenge them to think. Like you're really good at giving them quality challenges and right sizing it. But instead of maybe just the physical challenge, what about the mental challenge as well?
mm.
That's where my mind goes
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's I think a lot of development is focused on showing up our weaknesses. Hey, you do this really bad, so we're going to do this practice so you can get better. But then, when you build off that strength, it's both, sharpening the offense or sharpening the sword in this sense and the shield. We want to be able to be unbreakable, but we also want to be able to inflict damage. And in sporting terms, this means, scoring those goals or having our team be the better learners and having that greater capacity and potential for development achieved because the coach is receptive. I think a lot of coaches are inherently very curious people, because coaching is a very social role. It's all about understanding, interacting, predicting human behavior. So we have to be very curious people in our roles, but we lose that sense of curiosity when the switch flicks in our coach brain going, oh wait, I'm going to be out of a job when we don't win. So we just go, oh, what does the best coach and the best team do? We're going to follow that offense, regardless if our personnel can fit it or not. We see so many academy football coaches in the UK be like, oh, Pep Guardiola, he's the best coach. Our player's going to play that style of football. Sure, it can work, sure, but then it's helping coaches bring that curiosity, and when we show them the strengths, hey, I'm doing this well, they're very likely going to ask the question, what am I not doing well? And when they ask that question, that can of worms is like the tastiest can of worms ever. It's like the best thing you can have with a coach because you can really sit down and reflect, intrigue, poke, prod, and understand why he believes certain things about learning. Once
and,
you have
and
that,
get them open to that conversation in the first place.
exactly.
And a lot more people enjoy diving into the things they do well. And to your point about like often us coaches, we're proud people think we're doing great work all the time. Feeding into that motivational pool
Mm,
to drive change is a lot more effective. And how do we get to the reflective stage? There's so many avenues, teaching in the school system is often a classic. Like when you look at the way that schools are working now, it's they're trying to move away from just give it and then you repeat back and more so into the okay, let me ask some good questions. Um, Back when I went through schooling, it was a lot more of like the Socratic seminar. That was the type where you kind of get in a circle and all of that. But I think it's now more morphing into these
mm,
moments through the classroom where I tell you things, but then it's getting that reflective time, activities where you get to mess around, experiment, explore,
mm.
to your point, engage with that level of curiosity. That's the real driver of improvement. From when I'm when I think about my time trying to coach coaches how to coach, that's what's been most effective in my practice.
And I guess to add on to that, coaches, like to any coach listening, it's well and good to find that next best practice, that next best game, or the next best drill, activity, whatever you want to call it, to implement into your next training session. But open your curiosity, open it to understand maybe the psychology behind athletes and performance. Understand, you know, a lot of coaches, and maybe this is not the place to say it, but a lot of coaches are doing the exact same thing and they think they're doing something completely new. They're like, oh my God, my system is no one's doing my system my way. I guarantee you, your systems are very similar to other people's systems. Your edge as a coach comes from being curious on how the human body works, how the human mind works, how teams function, how how your behavior affects that function. How does the amount of questions you ask versus the amount of instructions you give change the behavior of your players? I could encourage every coach to go into their next training session with a little lapel mic and just listen to yourself and how you engage with your players. It'll tell you a lot about yourself in useful ways. Have Bring that sense of curiosity outside of just how do you develop the game skills, because sometimes what's limiting the progress in the game skills is they're stuck somewhere else. They don't feel like they want to be here anymore, or they're just stressed out with the rest of their life, or they feel like they're in a slump, or whatever. There's just so many things that could stop them from engaging with your actual practice activity, and you could have done all the right steps to create that practice activity. So feel free to diversify your knowledge, your curiosity outside of just what's the best formation or what's the best tactic or what's the best, boots to wear. Think about other things as well. And it's hard. It's not easy, but this the more you engage with it, the easier it is to spot it in real life. And then the more you want to engage with it outside of again. Because once, when I read, let's say I'll read a book about motivation, I'll happily go and talk to my athletes, like, what motivates you? And because I've had that conversation, I've applied some of that learning. The next motivation podcast, the next motivation chapter, I'm onto it. I understand it, and I can already link some of my players. Oh, this is going to be really good for this player, and I'll send a picture. Hey, I'm reading this, or I've listened to this. What are your thoughts? Now I have like a really flourishing relationship with certain players, with even other staff on my team. And from that way, we have this culture driven by curiosity that always helps us find that next step of improvement.
As a person who's probably more curious than most, I love the fact that that's where we've headed is just being curious. And how do you keep that curiosity? Because it's so easy to lose it when we feel like we've reached some level of mastery,
Mm,
and try to continue to have those new eyes out there. Because to your point, like where's the real rate limiter? I kind of put it into four different buckets. I'll call it mental, physical, execution, and tactical.
mm,
Like physical, usually it's like physical strength. Like, can you physically do this? Execution would be like, okay, can you pull off this motor skill of sorts,
yeah.
and actually execute what you're thinking, and can you actually then go and execute in the physical world? Mental, like, are you thinking the right way? Do you have the
Mm,
mental capacity to handle that? And then tactical of like, how do you apply it within the structure of whether it be
exactly.
a team environment or just whatever the activity is, and figure out where the real rate limiter is. A lot of in my sport, hockey, and with high school kids, what is a lack of what you would see as like execution is really just lack of physical strength. Like they physically
Mm,
don't have the strength to hold themselves in the posture to pull things off,
yeah.
or they can't get the puck fast enough to somewhere because they physically don't have the strength to push into the stick and
Mm,
zip it around. So like where's the real rate limiters? Being curious to figure out, okay, what actually needs to get done, and understanding what does this player need? What does this coach need to hit that next level of performance? And last thing I'll kind of end on here of like, I think coaches are getting better and better at creating good environments for learning to occur. I think we don't spend enough time on helping the players attune themselves to a good environment so that they're also
mm,
great learners. So
mm,
I see that as maybe it's less on more like we call AAA or the elite level. those players, usually they're a little more self-driven, but the levels where you're just playing for enjoyment and you still are striving for quality performance, it may not be to that level of ability to learn. And ultimately, it's a learner's game. It just ends up in an athletics area that
Yeah,
we're applying that learning.
100%. I echo those thoughts. Um, I had something to add there. It was kind of when you look at that rate limiter, when you're more curious about identifying the rate limiter, it has a serious consequential effect on your intervention. If it is just a physical thing, then it's okay, maybe he needs a bit more rep, just a bit more time, he'll get there. But if it's like a psychological, that mental thing, oh, he's looking real uncomfortable, he doesn't want to be here. It's instead of more time, it's how do I have an effective conversation with him? Being a good conversationalist is then the next skill to have as a coach, not just, hey, go do this activity for 15 minutes. And then if you didn't improve, well, unlucky, you're just bad. No, it's, well, I need to do a bit more than that. How do I have those really nice conversations that help someone feel calm in a moment of distress or get someone fired up and locked into a task and give them maximal energy? Or how do I get them to understand that, patience. A lot of the learners will get frustrated when they get things wrong or they've worked on a skill for a couple of days and they haven't got it. And it's just like, it's okay. How do you show them that patience is a virtue? How do you show them that patience has its own dividends? Having those conversational traits as a coach is valuable. Now, I'm not saying every coach within a coaching staff needs to be experts conversationalists, but there should be one or two. You should have coaches within your staff if you're afforded the luxury of a staff to be like, yeah, you're my hype guy. You should be able to go talk to my players and they'll feel good. You're my feedback guy. You know how to say it and like you know how to get the point across, but no one's gonna end up crying. No one's gonna take it personally. And then you also have the guys like you are never gonna speak to the players, Gun. You're too mean. We've all met that coach who's like, you're a bit too mean. Just talk to them on the ice, talk to them on the pitch. But when you sit down and address the whole thing, like people feel they lose their confidence. So it's understanding those things as well. Um, and that man management ultimately dictates a lot of coaches' jobs.
I feel like we can go even further, but short and sweet, I feel, is always best. Not to overwhelm. So I think we've given a lot of the listeners here things to chew on, reflect on, and hopefully take and make their lives and coaching and playing a little more fulfilling and a little more enjoyable. So, Cabs, anything else that we need to cover? Otherwise, we'll wrap this one up.
Let's wrap this one up for now. And if the viewers want it, I'm happy to come back on again.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know with the Australia to US conversion on the East Coast, especially early morning for me, late night for you. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise and experience.
No, thank you so much, Greg. Thank you for having me.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.